G'day, I'm Patrick from Douglas Fir Design. Welcome to the Router Bits. You've created your stile and rail edges for your cabinet door, and now you need to create the panel for the inside. I really want to use the same material for the inside. It's just 19mm stock. This was a 285mm wide board, but I've had to cut it down so that it fits exactly inside there. It's pretty simple to figure out the size. You just need to get this measurement here and add on the depth of that groove. But make sure that you don't make it too tight, so maybe subtract a millimetre. Now in this case, the width of our cavity is 220 by 370 roughly, and I'm going to add, each of those grooves is about 9mm deep, so I'm going to add 18mm onto those measurements, and that's in fact what I've ripped this down to. So now we can go about using what's called a horizontal panel raising bit to create the correct profile the whole way around here, so that it slides perfectly into this cabinet door frame. Basically what the panel raising bit does is cut an appropriate profile. There's a number of different patterns so that you can slide this into those grooves that we've created. Now if you're using say a 12mm piece of MDF or some thinner timber, then you really only need to cut that profile off the front edge there, because it'll slide in nicely, just making sure that the remaining timber is just thinner than your groove. But because I want to use a full 19mm thick panel, I actually need a panel raising bit with a back cutting blade, or a back cutting relief blade, I'm pretty sure it's called. So one of those blades is going to cut the top edge, and the bottom blade is actually going to remove some more material from the bottom edge so that I get a perfect tongue which will fit into the grooves that I've already created with my stile and rail jointing bits. These bits are huge, whether or not you're using one with or without a back cutter. They're massive. You've got to run them at a really low speed. The maximum speed that you're meant to run these at is 12,000 RPM. I basically put it on the slowest speed that my Triton router goes, and that's been working perfectly. But because they're taking up so much material, you also need to set the fence depth so that you're not doing that full profile cut in one pass. I actually did this in 3. If you're working with a really hard timber or something that was prone to splitting and so forth, then you might want to do it in even more passes than that. But just have a go, and you'll get the feel of these guys, and that you certainly don't want to be pushing too much material through them at any one pass. If it's your first time using these, it might be really worth putting a test piece of the timber through first so you can get a feel for exactly how it's going to react, and then you'll know how many passes you might need to do, how many mils you can do in each cut. Once you've locked your panel raising bit into the router, you need to obviously lower it down into the table, but you might find that you need to remove your throat plate because the bits are just too big. So this bit is basically, it will fit within the hole of my router table, but not with one of these plates in, so I just have to remove it. You have to remove it before you put the bit in, otherwise you'll never get it out. We need to set the height of this, and the way we're going to do that is actually by using our existing pieces of rail and stile, which we created earlier, because that is what we need the tongue that this thing will create to match with. And one of the ways that I've found is relatively simple to do this is to place a small ruler or something flat, any piece of metal, or you could even use a little piece of timber, inside that groove, flat against the bottom, and then use that as a reference to line up with the top side of what is going to be our tongue. So I've got that lined up using my little, I actually used an engineer's square, running that inside the flat against the bottom of the groove there. Now, if it's a fraction of a millimetre off, it's not actually the end of the world, because it just will mean that the panel will sit a fraction of a millimetre higher or lower than our rails and our stiles. And visually you're never going to see that because those edges are not right next to each other. There's all of this detail and profile cut out in between them. So, you know, half a mil out, you're just not really going to notice. Ideally, you get it as you get it right on, but it's a tricky setup because it's hard to get any kind of measuring device right into that point inside on that tooth that you actually need. Now that we've set the height, we can set the fence. But like I said earlier, we're going to be doing this in multiple passes, so we're not actually setting the fence right to the bearing. That's where we're going to end up after a few passes. We're going to set it much further in front of the bearing so that our first pass is just taking off some of the material. We're going to do our ingrown passes first, and in this case, as with our rails and styles, it'll be the face of the panel that we want to see will be facing downwards at all times. So we do our ingrain first, and then while leaving the fence at that same position, then we do our edge grain. And the reason that we do that is so that if you get any tear out on the end grain at the back edge, which you might get a little bit, that's then removed when you do these edge grain passes. We'll do that a number of times until we've got that to our full depth.